Welcome to a growing. We're going to talk a little bit about the situation in Japan tonight. I was just recently checking out some polls, and I'm sure different polls will say different things, but 80% of the people are somewhat favorable about the use of nuclear technology for getting energy. And I was puzzled by that because I thought that there was a lot more people that were in opposition to it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that because of watching all the coverage of the Fukushima the last few days, they're not really given any real information. In fact, one case they talk about 120 tons of spent nuclear fuel in one of them pools. But they don't connect that up to the fact that there's 104 of those nuclear facilities just in this country alone, let alone 400 worldwide. And so there you are, you have an incredible amount of this fuel, and they're not talking about it, that it's there and how dangerous it is. And that was just one example I could think of right off the bat, that they weren't really given a good feeling for the dangers involved in this. So I've asked Lloyd Marbet and Greg Kafoury, both activists in this area for quite some time, since late 70s, isn't it?
Been a long time.
Been a long time. They didn't want to go into details on that. So it's been a long time. And they've been involved in this, and we're going to just talk a little bit about this. And Lloyd's brought some pictures, if we can get these up at the last minute here, and we're going to just go into detail on some of this. So welcome to the program, you both.
Thanks.
Last time you were on, I think you both came on with Dan Meek talking about the Trojan coming down.
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
That's been a while.
2006 is
It's
when
amazing.
I was just looking that up.
Right.
And I don't know, what was your first thought, Lloyd? I'll get your first thought in a minute. When you saw this happening.
Well,
It's been a week now.
You mean you're talking about
the Fukushima?
The Fukushima reactors. Yeah. Well, my first thought is it's the growing tragedy. It's what we've been trying to basically warn people against for most of our lives now. Mm-hmm. And here we are experiencing it again. It's Chernobyl come home again.
Right, and they're already starting to inch that up. They're up to, what, 5 now, I think.
Yeah, I think they raised it again.
They raised it again, yeah. And I'm sure you had somewhat the same feeling.
Well, my feeling was that it's not going to happen in Oregon because the people of Oregon shut the Trojan Nuclear plant. Mm-hmm. And if we hadn't, we'd be living, on the edge of potential catastrophe, which the Japanese are now seeing unfold.
Mm-hmm. And it could be getting a lot worse too.
It's going to get a lot worse.
And Trojan was right on the Columbia River, and if there was that big Juan de Fuca plate tremor happening like they say it could happen every 500 years, the water would have backed up that far easily.
The real risk would be from disruption of the internal workings of the plant. What happened in Fukushima is the mirror of what could happen here. On their east, they have a giant subduction zone where one of the Earth's huge plates is going under another. And here it's on our west. The distance is about the same. The length of the potential rupture is about the same. And every few hundred years, we have earthquakes from 8 to 9.5, much the same as the Japanese. And Trojan was built to withstand about a 7 on the Richter scale, which is we face an earthquake with hundreds of times more power than Trojan was ever designed to withstand, and that was one of the issues that we used in the initiative campaigns to try and rouse the people against the plant. And it was a weak spot, and it was recognized as a weak spot.
Mm-hmm. We also raised it directly with the regulatory agencies. Greg and I, in 1998, petitioned directly, or excuse me, in 1988, petitioned directly to the State's Energy Facility Siting Council to hold hearings on whether the plant was built to withstand a subduction zone earthquake.
Mm-hmm. But none of those actually is what shut it down. What shut it down was they had leaky tubes, something like that, wasn't it? So all that appeal didn't really work.
No, that's right. And I think it was a combination of things that shut it down when they finally experienced the leak in the steam generator tubes. I mean, we had, at that point, we had been in 3 elections against Portland General Electric. We lost all 3 elections, but we showed that we had the capability to come back in the face of defeat, and that we were not giving up, not at all. In fact, after the after the plant shut down, we petitioned all the regulatory agencies to hold hearings on the safety of this plant and investigate the leak from within the Nuclear Regulatory Commission about the scientists who said that this plant was unsafe to operate. And then we went to the gates, when they wouldn't give us relief, we went to the gates of Trojan, and at one point I was handcuffed to Greg in front of a judge.
That was between the time when it shut down because of the leak, the last leak, and when they finally decided to abandon the plant entirely.
Right.
But these three election campaigns that we had, each one we got closer to taking them out. And there were 9 nuclear plants, Westinghouse plants, that all had the same defect of steam generators that were failing years or decades before their time. And in every one of the plants, the other 8, they repaired them. They replaced them at a cost of $250 million. And Trojan is the one where, facing this additional expense and facing the threat of additional initiative campaigns, Marilyn and Jerry Wilson ran a campaign in '92 along with ours. Theirs got 43% of the vote to shut the plant. So we were moving in on them from every side. Barbara Roberts was supporting hearings that would have required PGE people to go under oath and disgorge documents that they'd been keeping secret. So a whole lot of things came together, and PGE finally just took one last step back and went off a cliff.
Went off a cliff.
Yeah.
You mentioned Westinghouse, and that reminds me of what I was saying at the beginning of the lack of in-depth coverage. Westinghouse, a while back, I don't know if they still do, was one of 3 corporations, Westinghouse, GE, and Disney, that owned a whole smear of media. And I think that these were built by GE, weren't they, over there in Fukushima?
Yeah.
Because the name was mentioned a few times.
Right, they're Mark I boiling water reactors, and there's 23 of similar design operating in this country today.
If you talk about the control of the media, there are moments when you can observe how the media really works, and you gain insight that is really quite stunning. For instance, when the Trojan cooling tower was imploded, and anybody who wants to see it could just Google Trojan implosion.
Yeah, or demolition is the word I use.
Yeah, well, it's an incredible visual.
Oh, it is.
They had all the dignitaries there with the front row seats, and we were up on a highway a couple of miles further back, but
on a cliff.
Yeah, and one of our people videotaped it, and that Jason Dunlap, and that videotape received 500,000 hits in about 24 hours. And the reason it did is because the networks didn't carry the visual. They didn't show, none of them showed the reactor coming down. Now, let me tell you, any time that some 2-bit flea bag hotel from the 1950s is demolished, is imploded with the dynamite devices in Las Vegas or something, hey, that's a visual that makes all 3 of the networks. You see it on cable over and over. Here, just about the largest nuclear plant in the world, this 500-foot tower comes crumbling down in a huge cloud of smoke. I mean, it's a tremendous scene. And everybody was there. There were hundreds of cameras there, and nobody went with it. And that's because of the power of the industry. They just reached out and said, this never happened. Just
and
like
if
that.
people don't see it, they move on the next day, and it didn't happen.
And they're doing the same thing now.
Off message. It was off message, right?
Now that I've got you folks here, and I remembered to ask this question. They showed the 104 nuclear sites. And they had 1 somewhere around here and 2 in eastern Oregon or Washington.
1 in eastern Washington.
As far as I know, they have 2 there, though. As far as I know, Whoops was close. So there's really only 1 in this area.
That's right. That's the Columbia Power.
That's the Columbia Power up there at Richland or whatever.
Run by that Northwest Energy, the new name for the Washington Public Power Supply System, Whoops.
Whoops. So I'm wondering,
they changed the name so it's safe now.
So I'm wondering exactly how much of the information that they're giving on that map is wrong, besides what's going on in Oregon and Washington.
There's an enormous amount of misinformation. One of the big lies that's being told, and you see it everywhere. You see it in the New York Times, you see it on AP, you see it everywhere, is that there was very little radiation released at 3 Mile Island, and yet there were no measurements taken, essentially. And what little information is out there has never been fully released. There were people miles from the plant who had a sudden and very strong taste of metal in their mouths, which is which is what you get when you get doused with a huge amount of radiation.
At one
I mean,
time,
to be able to taste it, man.
That's scary.
That's a well-recognized symptom, and yet the authorities say, oh no, nobody got doused. But in fact, there were huge releases, and we know it. There were plants that grew weird. There were animals that grew weird. And the problem is that to do the studies to show how many people actually died, cancer rates, and so on, to match them with the wind and so on, is enormously expensive. And the industry does the studies, right? Mm-hmm. So that's like the drug industry. They get a study they don't like, man, you never see it.
You never see it, right? Well, it seems to me that I've read that, I don't know, late 50s, early 50s, that they did a deliberate release of radioactive iodide from Hanford.
Yes.
Have you seen any?
Well, they made deliberate releases of a number of radioactive isotopes from Hanford.
Killed a lot of people.
Killed a lot of people, and the thing is, it kills them down the road, so it can't be directly attributed to that unless you're making the studies. And obviously, according to what has been going over the air in the last week, they really haven't been studying it very well.
Well, the military had blew off bombs in the desert in Nevada and New Mexico. Then they had soldiers get out of the trenches and march right into ground zero, just to see what would happen.
One of the interesting things about the information that's been coming out from this accident is that either deliberately or as a part of the accident, the external monitoring systems failed. So there really was no way to measure the radiation that was coming off from the system that was put into place to do that in the event that there would be problems at the plants.
There's been a lot of nuclear apologists coming on. They've been, actually I saw some today where they actually brought some people on there for no nukes at all. But there's been a lot of nuclear apologists coming on and talking about, well, those were first generation. We're into fourth generation now.
Yeah, that's right.
There's nothing to worry about.
We're not into fourth generation.
Is there anything to worry about? I mean,
so those are old plants. They say every plant in the United States is an old plant. There aren't any young ones.
Not since '76.
That's true. Which, by the way, is of great concern because there's not a spent fuel pool that doesn't have the same problem that the spent fuel pools at these reactors have. Not one. And I don't know how many people are aware, but reactor number 4 at Fukushima is a spent fuel pool meltdown because in November of 2010 they removed the fuel that was in the reactor vessel and put it in the pool, which is right next to the reactor vessel inside the upper part of the building, which does not have a containment structure. It's just sheet metal. So it's just like all the other spent fuel pools across this country. There's not adequate protection in the event you have these kinds of accidents.
So when you get down to it, the spent fuel pools are actually much more of a danger to the community than anything else.
Well, the whole thing is a danger to the community.
The reactor is a lot more likely to go. But what you had here is accident in the reactor led to steam explosion, led to probably fire in the spent fuel pool. So it was a reactor accident that led to a spent fuel pool accident. A spent fuel pool is very easy to keep safe if you don't have a problem with a reactor. I mean, you can do it with a hose. But
that's what they're trying to do.
You need to keep water in the pool.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
And what apparently happened is that the earthquake cracked the base. They think that the stainless steel base in the concrete is cracked because they've been pouring a lot of water into the number 4.
But it keeps going.
It's too bad we don't have these photos that I put together because it shows one of those is a diagram.
If they get those together for us, I'm sure they'll be able to get some of them, and hopefully that'll be it. Because when I first heard about this, of course, they release this information so slowly that you get the danger and the disaster gradually, and I think that is a spin in itself.
Well, you got layers of information distortion. You've got the plant operators who have an enormous financial interest in minimizing what's going on. Then they only speak to the Japanese government, which has an enormous investment in keeping everybody calm and not panicking. And then you have the American experts who are in there, who are all members of the empire. I mean, the nuclear empire is a very tight group. We did the hearings before the Atomic Industrial Licensing Board when Trojan in 1977 was found to have been built with only half the earthquake strength that it was designed to have. There had been massive errors in the construction, and so I participated in hearings that lasted on and off over a 9-month period. And what we learned is that they would hire experts who would come in, and I asked the experts, did they tell you what would happen if they didn't like your opinion? They said, oh yeah, they just wouldn't use me. So they get to cherry pick their experts, and then the guy who was the lead lawyer for the company in these hearings was a former member of the board of the Atomic Energy Commission. And here he's making, vast sums of money now. So they go back and forth between the government and the industry, and everybody's scratching everybody's back, and they're all a very, very tight crew.
We also have to mention that there's the International Atomic Energy Administration, which supposedly is this huge oversight. But the fact of the matter is that the International Atomic Energy Administration was put together to monitor the proliferation of nuclear weapons. It was not put together to be a super regulatory agency over the operation of nuclear plants in individual countries. So they're basically begging for information from the Japanese government and the Japanese TEPCO, the utility that operates these plants, but they can't mandate it. They can't mandate anything. There's no checks and balances.
So there's no checks and balances, and there's the industry and the revolving door between industry and the agencies. Now, isn't it the fact that these older ones have to be recommissioned? And I got to give it to the corporate media. They have covered this in some ways. That some of these are old, and they're in the process of being recommissioned right now, even though they're in the same design maybe as the one.
Are you talking about the reactors here in the United States?
Right, yeah.
Oh, yeah, they're all up for extending their licensing life.
And so that's why
20-year licenses.
That's why there's such a they're bailing so hard in order to cover themselves, like Greg was saying.
They know, for instance, radiation causes all kinds of complex changes in metal. So, for instance, the reactor cores get, or the steel in the reactors gets more brittle, hard,
warping.
More, it has. There have been terrible corrosion problems at Davis-Besse. They had corrosion in the reactor. So you got 6 inches of stainless steel, and when they found the problem, it was down to half an inch in the reactor.
Vessel head.
Yeah, we've had so many near misses. People say, well, you go Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and now the Japanese plants. But there have been so many near misses, it's not even funny. And only a relatively small number of them have drawn much publicity. Others have been disclosed years later. But all over the world, the Japanese company is notorious for cover-ups and near misses.
Yeah, we've been hearing about that on the news quite a bit. That I didn't want to give the impression that the corporate media is not talking about this at all. They are bringing out some information, but there just seems to me there's so much more. Like one thing that really struck me is they keep saying this plume, if it was to exist, and we are getting a little bit of radiation in this country, but they say it's going to circle up and go to Russia, and then it's going to maybe circle around to the Aleutian Islands, and then it might get down to the west coast. But then all they talk about is it's California. They don't talk about the Aleutian Islands. They don't talk about the eastern coast of Russia or Siberia, where it would hit first. Was there anybody measuring anything there? We don't hear about it.
We'll see how bad it gets. If the spent fuel pool in number 4 ignites in a major way, it's going to create such intense radiation that people won't be able to get near it. They'll be driven perhaps all the way off site, and then gradually everything goes, because you have to have people on site
to keep it.
to try and cool what's there to the extent that's possible. And it may be impossible. I mean, they think a couple of the reactors may be fractured. I mean, you look at the pictures, the amount of damage is incredible.
And as far as alternative sources of information, I think it would be useful to talk about different web locations that you can go to.
Right.
For instance, the International Atomic Energy Agency has a website, and they do update it every day with information, and it's useful to look at. Another good source is the Nuclear Information Resource Service. They also have an ongoing update of a file that's been created ever since the beginning of this accident. The New York Times. Greg has been sending me a lot of stuff from the New York Times. We trade stuff back and forth.
Union of Concerned Scientists has a good website.
Union of Concerned Scientists is another one.
They're a very good group.
Yeah.
And there is information out there. Probably every week I'm on this program, I tell people, Oh, good job.
We got the pictures.
I tell people that they got to get around and do a little digging themselves. They can't take this stuff at face value.
Can we see the pictures so that we can comment on them?
I guess she could just bring them up. If you got them in a certain order,
yeah.
Maybe she'll just bring one up and
of them.
We'll start from there.
This is just basically the introduction of a PowerPoint presentation that I'm already doing on global warming and nuclear power, and that's called Before Hitting the Ground. But the reason why I brought that is because it has the cooling tower pictures that were taken when Trojan went down. So next slide.
It takes a second or two. Okay. You can't bring them up. There we go.
You asked me to bring a slide on the nuclear fuel cycle because I think you wanted to highlight that there's all along the nuclear fuel cycle, and this unfortunately does not capture the whole slide.
The whole thing, right?
But there's problems in the nuclear fuel cycle from the moment you mine uranium to when you take it to enrich it, when you create the fuel fabrication, when you put it in the reactor, when you put it in the spent fuel pool, when you put it in the ground, if you can get it there, or if you attempt to reprocess this, and that's what's called the fuel cycle. So this slide shows where the earthquake took place in Japan. Now again, this is only a portion of the slide, but you can see, actually it's too bad we can't see further down because that shows where the reactor locations are, and there's 2 reactor locations at Fukushima. There's actually 10 reactors there. 4 are at a site that's about 6 miles away from where the 6 reactors, 4 of which are having problems also, are located. So and that's called Fukushima number 1. Now, I don't know what the next one is, or...
Well, actually, we have a treat because Rudy Nussbaum just called in.
That's great. That's great.
So if they can get Rudy up on the phone here, you might mention a little bit about who Rudy is.
He's a professor at Portland State, a professor of physics. He's probably retired by this time. He is a dead ringer for Albert Einstein. Which
right. We need
tremendous weight to everything he says.
Right.
And a great activist.
And he's someone that's been very much involved in looking at the health effects of low-level radiation. That's been a big interest of his.
All right, Rudy, are you there?
Yes.
All right, go ahead and continue, please, Rudy.
I just wanted to add to this discussion, about the spent fuel pools. Nobody has raised yet the question, why are they there in the first place?
You mean on location there?
Yeah.
Right.
And are so unprotected. We should at least mention to the other viewers that is one part of the failed policy of taking care of the waste. So maybe Lloyd can say a few words about that.
I think the spent fuel pools at nuclear power plants are the Achilles heel of the whole operation of the nuclear installation itself. They were never designed to withstand the kind of events that they're suffering now. And another thing that is of great concern, and one of the reasons why these pools become so terribly important, is that the fuel is inside a metal cladding which is made out of zirconium. And the reason why they chose zirconium is because it acts as a window to the neutrons that are passing in between the uranium atoms as the fissioning is taking place. The only problem is that zirconium can catch fire if it gets hot enough. And unfortunately, if you have fresh fuel and you have a lot of ionizing radiation in it, you can actually reach high temperatures, and that's what's causing the hydrogen bubbles that have been exploding at these nuclear plants in Japan. And any particular spent fuel location that has nuclear fuel has this particular problem.
The other problem here is that these fuel pools were designed to only handle waste for a few months, because when the nuclear industry started, they said, well, we pretty soon we'll have a place to put the waste, so we'll be coming along. The garbage man's going to come and take the stuff away. So the spent fuel pools were just supposed to handle like one core, but instead, since there was no place to put the garbage man never came and may never come, they started saying, well, we'll just move the stuff closer together in the pool. So they started taking these radioactive rods and putting them closer together, and they'd have some hearings, and they put them closer together again.
More and more heat.
Put them together again. And I mean, it's a recipe for disaster.
It is. If there's a fire.
Right.
You know.
Well, Rudy, you said that this is the most troubling thing was the spent nuclear fuel pools, but you phrased it in such a way that that isn't the only one. What are some of the other problems that you see with uses of nuclear technology to get energy?
Let's just say this, that the whole nuclear energy development was born out of the use of the atomic bomb, the aftermath, the psychological trauma that had to be covered up by talking first by President Eisenhower about atoms for peace, and out of this came the whole development of this kind of a second part of our own democratic government. That's the nuclear industry that had so much power and so much money that you couldn't even get scientific data published, or you still cannot, or very difficult to publish any scientific study in the open literature, scientific literature, that is not in favor, that has outcomes that are not in favor of that industry. I have a lot of experience with that. However, I will mention just one thing that I have been involved with. It's a little bit off the subject because now I'm talking about nuclear power reactors that are perfectly well functioning and have no ruptured reactor vessels or burning spent fuel pools. Those are the 16 reactors in Germany. A study was made, and it's a real good study, that showed that in the vicinity, direct vicinity of all of these reactors, the risk for leukemia among children younger than 5 years is more than doubled. Now, those are perfectly running reactors, no emissions beyond what the normal operation emits. Now we're talking about Chernobyl type of emissions, which are maybe 1 million times as much radiation than what comes out of these normal operating reactors, which are supposedly emitting materials that are way, way below the so-called safe limits. And yet, there is absolutely no doubt that there is a direct correlation between children living within 10 kilometers of these plants and having a doubling of their risk for leukemia.
You know, you see the same thing at Trojan and a handful of other sites that have been closed. As soon as the plant closes, the infant mortality, spontaneous abortion, and so on, sharp drop just immediately.
Exactly, which is all you need to prove that this is the relation.
Rudy, one other thing that I'd like to bring up, because I know that you're aware of this, the New York Academy of Sciences published a book, Chernobyl, Consequences of the Catastrophe for People and the Environment. Yeah. And this is a book that was based on over 5,000 studies that were done by Russian-speaking scientists that were never considered by the World Health Organization when they did their early analysis in which they attempted to basically say that there had been really very little impact from what happened at Chernobyl. Would it be fair to say that this book, if somebody wanted to get some idea of what the Japanese people are going to face, and we may also ultimately face if the radiation that is being emitted from these plants comes from a full meltdown, are the health effects that are described in here something that would be an introduction into what it is that we're going to experience with Fukushima?
Yes, I would say anyone that is really interested and has enough stamina to read through scientific papers
Well put.
Should look at that book. Now, I must make some reservations about it. On the one hand, the Russian literature has indeed been totally ignored by the West on grounds as simple as that nobody reads Russian, for one thing. To translate all these papers is very expensive. For many decades, when we were building nuclear weapons, the American government subsidized translation of physics journals in Russia in order to be up to date on what's going on. That has long been discontinued. So right now, this is the only source for Russian literature. Now, I have been in the field of nuclear physics for a long time, and I have some reservations. Some of the Russian literature is not quite up to the standards that we have here. So honesty has to be prevailing. However, you have to not just look at only the book by Yablokov. It fits in and it is perfectly consistent with quite a few studies that were done in the West and have equally been ignored. There's no doubt that the mortality for newborns in several of the European countries, as far away as Germany, some of the Scandinavian countries, has risen after about 9 months or so after the explosion in Chernobyl. These, for instance, these studies have never been considered by the international IAEA, but also not by the UNESCO report, the UNSCARE report, as it is called. That's the United Nations Scientific Committee on Atomic Radiation. There are quite a few European studies that go exactly in the same direction as those Russian studies.
And the Russian
in my view, there is no doubt about the fact that these doses that were given to the European countries by the United Nations, that were said, oh, the fallout is only 1/100th of what would cause health effects. It's not true. They have been lying from the beginning. So we don't even have to consider some of the Russian studies that might be questionable, and it would be not appropriate in this setting to say which ones are good and which ones aren't.
Rudy, the study that was published by the Russian study that was published after the studies were finally translated into English in the New York by the New York Academy of Sciences, the conclusion they came to was that Chernobyl has to this point killed 1 million people. Do you think that's a ballpark number?
I think that's a ballpark number, because what you have to include is all these children too, and you know, there are a lot of victims are not even necessarily caused by these statistics. The trouble with one of the basic problems with the Russian studies is that when the accident happened, the Soviet government was at its last leg, but it was still there. They didn't allow any of the Russian doctors to put on the death certificate radiation as a cause of death. So therefore, many of the Russian statistics of mortality and also morbidity, which is say if that's the statistics of cancers that are not immediately killing you but have occurred, that many of these statistics are not really trustworthy. That's a very important point to know.
Rudy, in the Chernobyl book, in the last chapter, there's a statement of conclusion by all three of the Russian scientists that were involved in compiling the scientific studies that make up this book, and I'd like to read you just that last paragraph. It's very short, and see if you agree with it. It says, and I quote, "The Chernobyl catastrophe demonstrates that the nuclear industry's willingness to risk the health of humanity and our environment with nuclear power plants will result not only theoretically, but practically in the same level of hazard as nuclear weapons." Do you agree with that?
I fully agree with it. I just said today to a colleague that there was a time not too long ago when we were all worried about a nuclear war, and we were talking about ending at least Western civilization with a nuclear war. We don't even need a nuclear war. Our foolishness of this religion, and it is like a religion, to believe in the superiority of our technological advances, see nuclear power. We can kill it. We can kill our civilization that way, and I don't even know what the better way is. A slow death over an immediate death. I wouldn't want to judge that.
Well, see, it's remarkable how the industry has managed for all these decades to present itself as something which is high tech and new and sophisticated, when in fact all we're doing is boiling water. And and we're creating the most dangerous materials that have ever existed in the universe, all for the purpose of a few decades of boiling water. I mean, it's nuts.
Yeah, I agree. But remember what I said about what brought it in. What was the birth? The birth was to show that we could live with the atomic and the nuclear technology by making it useful. And we first they claim they can now totally remove poverty in all of the countries of Africa and so forth, because it's so cheap and it is so wonderful. And so this was the spin in order to overcome the consciousness of our use of the nuclear bomb on a civilian population.
And I remember when I was in grade school, and we would read the Weekly Reader, and they'd say, here a brand new use has been created for nuclear bombs. We're going to create harbors by blowing off four or five bombs. And they said, there is that problem with the radioactivity. We need to solve the radioactivity problem, and then we'll be doing it day after tomorrow, as if the radioactivity was sort of an afterthought.
Well, you notice that we never got a new canal. We never got that new canal.
The canals, the harbors.
Well, fortunately, let's be saying that.
Rudy, I want to share another quote with you, because I think this one too is quite apropos. Bill Nye, the science guy, kind of famous for being on television.
They interviewed him in the last week.
They also interviewed him after the Gulf oil spill, and he made the most amazing comment at the end of this interview. He was on a panel, and this is what he had to say. Now, just one more thing. We have tens of thousands of coal-fired power plants around the world. We have thousands and thousands of oil and gas-fired power plants. We have about 434 nuclear power plants. Climate change is a huge problem, if we try to address our energy needs with nuclear power and we get into the tens of thousands of nuclear power plants, we will have remarkable problems, astonishing problems. I hope this keeps everybody focused. I mean, this is one of the things that's greatly concerned me. I mean, you know, Greg and I have been in this a number of years. I'm growing tired. I mean, you know, there's just a lot of work that goes in to doing this kind of activist stuff. And yet, here you got this industry that kind of lives in perpetuity, that keeps developing a new mask, a new face that it can put out in front of the public and say, oh, trust me, come my way. You know, we're going to solve global warming. Come my way, come my way. And then you got people like Stuart Brand of Whole Earth Catalog rolling around with his dog and pony show about how wonderful it is that we can all be geoengineers and mess with the planet and, you know, hopefully do it right. And, you know, I would like to think that at some point we all get to that place where we go, wait a minute, this is shuck and jive. The time to end it is now.
Well, hopefully this program will be a small step in that direction.
Well, what we need is an international movement for conservation, energy efficiency, renewables, and local development, community control of the sources and distribution.
And we were saying
power.
This 30 years ago.
Yeah,
I mean, this is nothing new.
40 years ago.
Geez, you know, there was Barry Commoner and all those people that were doing it before us.
But you look at the blowout in the Gulf and the enormous contamination and so on. You look at the wars that we're fighting in the Middle East,
uranium,
which are largely about oil, and then of course using depleted uranium weapons, which poisons the children and so on.
We're poisoning the planet. We're poisoning ourselves.
It's all nuts, and the answers are there. But the reason why we keep making the wrong energy choices, and we have to recognize the enemy here. The reason is because, you know, we are burning coal because PP&L owns vast coal fields and they don't want to leave that stuff in the ground. You know, there are other companies, the nuclear companies own vast areas of uranium. They don't want to leave it in the ground. They want to turn it into something, turn it into nuclear waste, boil water, make money. And the solutions which are elegant and truly high-tech, wind, solar, and so on, you know, there's not the same kind of fortunes to be made. The wind is free. The sun is free.
Legislatures to buy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why we are, you know, bullied and intimidated, and our people are bribed into making the wrong choices, heading toward what Ralph Nader calls omnicide, the death of everything.
That's right. Well, Rudy, we're getting down to about the last 15 minutes of the program.
Yeah.
Do you have any final comment to make?
I would like to add something, if I can.
Sure, please do.
I would like to get back to the health effects, because this is something that I know something about. I think I would like to warn people about the technical lingo that's going to be thrown around about safe levels. Our president already knows, and he is a nuclear scientist, I think, just as he pretends to be one, by saying there will be no dangerous fallout over the United States. He cannot say that. He has absolutely no evidence that provides him with this, other than the people that tell him that's what you need to say.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, when people hear such things as allowable or safe levels of radiation, the first answer is there are none. No level of radiation beyond what we get out of the cosmos are safe. They may carry a very low risk, but any additional radiation over what we have, whether you go to the dentist or whether you go to the hospital and have an X-ray, they all add to the risk. So, and in many cases, you take the risk, because the alternative of not knowing for the doctor what's wrong with you is a larger risk, and that's perfectly reasonable. But people shouldn't believe the story about no risk. So that's number one. Secondly, all of these risk questions and statements about, oh, this dose is too low to have any effect, they always talk about external doses. In other words, we have to distinguish between two very different kinds of exposure. If you are in a vicinity of a functioning nuclear reactor, say you legitimately, at the time I did, and Lloyd probably too, visit the Trojan plant while it was operating. You get a monitor,
It does.
and you are reading of how much radiation you get. That was purely external radiation. The radiation danger is innumerably larger for radiation that you inhale, ingest, drink through your water, your milk, and so forth. So these levels, these so-called safe levels, refer to something totally different of what people are going to be exposed to once any fallout comes to the Oregon coast. So that's number one. It's just a pretense that they know what they're talking about. They don't.
Otherwise known as spin.
Yes.
You know,
The other thing that I want to add, and then I will not interrupt anymore, the other thing is that for the same amount of radiation, there is an enormous variety of susceptibility or sensitivity to the effects of radiation.
Among individuals.
Among individuals,
Yes.
and among age groups. The most
The young.
sensitive human being is the developing fetus. And therefore, when we get into the fallout, which I'm convinced we will, it may not be as big as Chernobyl, and it may well be. We don't know yet. People that have to be particularly cared for and thought about is the protection of pregnant women and children under the age of 5. They are much, much more sensitive to radiation. And it won't be immediately noticeable. It takes years to develop a leukemia, even in children. And it can take 30 years for an adult to come down with cancer, and it's impossible afterwards to determine whether that cancer was from chemicals or from radiation coming out of space or from radiation coming from Chernobyl or from above ground tests or whatever. So that's just one more thing that I wanted to add, because this is never being discussed in the lay press, that these distinctions between external and internal radiation and the enormous differences between individuals. And even the science is not fully developed, because the people that would have to do these studies do not have the money. They depend on government subsidies, and of course the government will only subsidize those studies that fit into the interests of the government and the industry that dominates the government.
Well, Rudy, I sure appreciate you calling in, and I think you've given the viewers an awful lot to think about here. That the whole idea of the program was to bring things out that we're not getting from the coverage that we've been getting, and I sure appreciate that you brought this forward.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for calling in.
Rudy's one of the few people who's done basic research about the impact, for instance, of the downwinders, which has been people who are radiated accidentally and on purpose by the authorities at Hanford. And Dr. Charles Grossman has done published studies
on the same subject, and you know, it's hair-raising stuff.
It's hair-raising stuff. Yeah. Well, we're down to about a little over 7 minutes, and I want to just remind folks that the book that Lloyd was talking about, he just recently did a series of interviews with Janet Sherman, who was the one that co-authored that book that he had mentioned.
She edited the book.
She edited the book.
She
That's
edited
right.
the book, and she's the author of a book, Life's Delicate Balance.
Right,
So.
and he did those, and you can find those. You just go to youtube.com/philosopherseed, the 2 words philosopherseed put together, youtube.com/philosopherseed, and he did 4 separate on varying subjects within the subject matter, the themes of nuclear, and you can find those there. They're just recently put up.
Yeah, those YouTubes wouldn't have
there we
been
go.
available if we had not had your involvement in it, Jim. You did the videotaping and the editing of it, and I'm very appreciative of what you did. We went up to Seattle over Christmas to pull this off.
There's the Life Delicate Balance. So we're down to about 7 minutes. Did you want to go into some more of those?
Well,
you know?
yeah, we can go into the slides some more
We
too.
don't have
but
a whole lot of
want
time.
to I want to hit on one thing that Rudy said. You know, there's this huge discussion about risk, and I was watching Charlie Rose. Everybody's doing a program now on what's happening in Japan.
Bandwagon.
And they had some person on there. I came into the program late and I couldn't identify who this person was, but he was making this case that the real problem over here at Fukushima is that we're risk averse. You know, that somehow or another, you know, that we need to expose ourselves.
Yeah.
We need to cast the fear aside and just walk right into this. And it caused me to write a poem, which I'd like to share.
Sure, please do.
It's called Meltdown in the Eyes of the Beholder, in memorial to the suffering of more nuclear victims. The problem is not that 4 Fukushima nuclear reactors are melting down, nor shockingly that it was never envisioned a worst-case scenario. No, according to the nuclear apologists, the real problem is we are risk-averse, pulling back from the precipice when we should be dancing on the edge of doom, Geiger counting what life is really all about, rather than sustainably living in peace with reverence for life, embracing the wisdom of doing no harm. And that's really what Greg and myself and others, you, have all been trying to say. We can live differently. We don't have to embrace this fast-paced rush over the cliff, which is what lemmings do. We could live our lives differently. And I would hope, again, that people would pause and think about that. Because, I mean, who's directing this show? Is it some corporate, you know, minion who's making millions, misguiding us about what the truth is all about? Or is it really the choices that we make about how we want to build our lives? To me, that's what really this is all about.
Right. You know, I want to kind of bring up one quick thing before you bring up a couple more slides as we talk about this nuclear cycle and the low-level radiation. It very seldom gets mentioned how much damage was done to the Native Americans, who are a lot of the folks who went in there to dig this stuff up over the centuries. And nobody talks about them. Their birth defects and all this is shot through the roof.
Well, but don't you understand? They lost the war.
That's
you know what I mean?
Yep.
You know?
That's exactly what's happening there, and so did Japan, for that matter.
Right.
We can factor that in as well. But with our 4 minutes left, you kind of want to go through a couple more of those slides,
Sure,
and we could go on for another hour.
No, that's fine. That's fine. This is, actually Greg wouldn't recognize this. This is the schematic of the Mark I reactor, showing the secondary containment, which is the top line that's coming across. That is all housed by the sheet metal roof. That's what the top of these reactors look like. The reactor vessel is down underneath under what's called a primary containment. It looks like a light bulb upside down. And then to the right, that arrow that's coming in, that's where the spent fuel is. The spent fuel is sitting right next to the reactor vessel, and that overhead orange thing is the crane that moves this stuff around. And you know, this is kind of nice, but we ought to take a look. Now this is what the reactor buildings look like at all 10 of the reactors that are on the coast of Japan where this event's taking
23
place.
of them here.
But if we could bring up the picture that shows the damage. Now this is the radiation exposure, which, you know, there's 200,000 people have been evacuated. It's probably way over that now. And of course the United States has been saying that it needs to go out 50 miles.
There's the book.
There's the book. But if you could bring up the picture of the accident itself, which shows the 4 reactors that have been impacted at Fukushima. This is the Chernobyl book.
She has to go through them while.
Okay. I think it's like early in the show.
We're not on Charlie Rose here.
I know, but we're doing our best. It's not bad. I mean, you know. We'll wait for it. If not, we can, you know.
Mm-hmm. There's so much to talk about in this issue, and we're just trying to hit the main points. Is I don't want to say that you are being lied to, but you're being spun at least.
You're being lied to.
You are, but in such a way that it's a casual lie. It's just a spin. It's a lie of omission a lot of times. Is exactly what it is. They're not really giving us.
It's public
the information.
relations.
Well, the guys that are on TV, by and large, are industry people, and it's almost a cult. I mean, you saw Breidenbach was on a couple of shows. There were 3 GE scientists who 35 years ago resigned, walked away, and they said the boiling water reactors are much more dangerous even than the rest of the nuclear plants are, and we will no longer be associated with this. And they formed a consulting group, and I mean, they're being paid by guys like, Lloyd Marbet and Greg Kafoury, so they're not, they haven't been doing high on the hog.
They haven't been working for us lately because they didn't get paid.
But no, they volunteered. You give them a plane ticket and they fly out, that sort of thing.
Right.
And these guys have been fighting nuclear power for all these years, and they're viewed as outcasts by the empire. They're the guys that didn't get written into the Bible.
Right, yeah, they didn't win the war. Yeah. So, we're down to about a minute. I guess you had trouble finding that one.
Oh, that's too bad. But anyway, you can probably throw it in later. I mean, the interesting thing about it is just the devastation. Looking at these, the number 1 reactor blew up, number 3's blown up, number 2, which has probably got the reactor vessel that's cracked, it doesn't show the signs of a blow up. Number 4, all the walls of the building are blown out, which apparently is related to the what's going on in the spent fuel pool of number 4.
Right.
And again, the bottom line here is nobody ever thought that was a worst case accident. Nobody.
And
nobody thought of it.
This could happen at any time. Well, we're down to about 15 seconds. Wish we had an hour and 15 seconds because there's a lot more to talk about.
Jim, thank you.
Dig around. There's a lot of information out there, folks, and there's a lot more that you're not being told. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.